As I was putting together my message, on Friday, as I'm kind of finishing it up, I'm watching the weather outside, and it's my favorite kind of weather. It's below freezing, but it's raining. And it's funny, it reminded me of a hike I took a number of years ago, because I've taken a lot of stupid hikes, just so you guys know that. And about, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I really wanted to do a winter ascent of Mount Washington. Now, as you may know, a winter ascent of Mount Washington is a fairly challenging undertaking. Now, I'd done summer hikes a few times up Mount Washington, so I'd been up there in the summertime. I'd done winter hikes of a smaller scale, but I'd never done that combination. And it's notorious for how challenging it is. So I wanted to be careful, so I partnered up with a guy who had actually done it before. That felt like a smart thing to do. And as we got there, because I was really excited for this hike. We get there, and it was just like Friday. It was freezing cold and raining. So as we're hiking up there, it's literally below freezing, but the precipitation is falling as rain. Well, what does it do as soon as it hits anything? It freezes. My gear's freezing up. The snow is all clumping. It's clumping in my boots. As we got to the higher altitudes and crampons, it's clumping in our crampons. You can't hold on to your ice axe because it's just sliding around in your hand. It wasn't the day I had pictured. But, we carried on. And as we finally get to tree line, as you start to leave the forest behind you and go up to the bare part of the mountain, we were more tired than we expected to be because the hike, always challenging, was a little extra challenging this day. And as we get up there, we're pretty beat already, but we're kind of pushing on. And then we reach an area near Mount Washington called the Alpine Garden. Now, if you recognize that name, you'll know that Alpine Garden is famous for one thing: the crazy wind that comes through there. That 80, 90, 100-mile-an-hour winds coming through there is a common thing that happens. Now, as we get up there, the winds aren't that bad, but they're substantial. Bad enough to the point that when a gust comes, you can't walk. You just stand still and wait for it to end, and then carry on again. Because this is my version of fun, by the way, right? And the thing is that if you've ever been in the Alpine Garden when the winds come, before you feel them, you hear them. If you've ever been there, you'll know what I'm about to say is not an overstatement. It sounds exactly like a train coming at you. Like you hear this roar, and you start to feel things vibrate, and then you realize eventually it's you that's vibrating, right, as this wind kind of hits you. And as we're walking along, the gusts are getting kind of worse and worse, and we're doing more standing still than actually walking at some points. So we get behind a boulder, kind of take a break, and then kind of scramble along really quickly, get to another boulder. Well, on one of my scrambles from boulder to boulder, a big gust comes. And again, I promise you, this is not an exaggeration. The wind hit me, picked me up off my feet, threw me to the ground, and if you're in an open, flat surface covered in ice with high winds, what do? You start sliding on your butt, right, towards a ravine. Right? Again, this is my idea of fun, right? And so what you do is you roll over onto your axe, push your axe down into the ice so it stops you. You do that, you hang out until the wind settles down, and then you kind of run over to your partner, which is what I did, and we get behind a boulder. It's freezing cold, but you're sweating, you're breathing really hard. But kind of part of my personal flavor of dysfunction is that when things get really hard like that, I get more convinced that I have to keep doing it. Right? So my mentality is that we've got to keep pushing to do this. We haven't gone through all this for nothing. We got to keep going. But fortunately, my partner had been here before. And he realized that we have reached a point that the conditions exceed our skill. Yes, there are certainly people who could carry on, but we're not them. So basically, because he had been with me and walking with me, he could basically say, no, man, we need to turn back. And although I didn't want to, I trusted him. So I said, okay, we'll turn back. But again, for me, the only path I could see was the path that I had walked in the first place. So we're going to go straight back to where we came from. That's the shortest way back down the mountain. But again, because he'd been here before, he knew that going back that way would expose us to the winds all that time all over again. And fortunately, he knew another way, that although it was a longer path, would get us out of the wind more quickly. And so what ends up happening is that because of his help, I got off of a dangerous path that I was traveling on, that I was convinced that I had to keep traveling on. But because of him, I found another way that led me to safety. And as I've kind of spent these past 2 weeks thinking about and praying about, we as a church, I believe that is exactly what God has called us to do for the community that we live in. That as we think about our church and what we're here to do, I think that we're called to do very much like what my friend did for me on that hike. Now remember that over these past few weeks, we've been talking about this idea of our purpose, right? And our purpose is to inspire people to pursue and find life in Jesus. And by defining our purpose, it answers a very important question. It answers the why question. Why does the United Church of Warner exist? We exist to fulfill that purpose. But then there's a second question. There's the how question. If that's why we exist, how do we do it? Because I think that as a church, we can easily be tempted to believe that our primary purpose is just encouraging people. That we can kind of think that we're supposed to be like these signs. Right? Yeah, don't give up. Hey, you're not alone. Right? You matter. And yes, we should be doing that. And we should be encouraging people. Because people need more encouragement. And that is a key part of what we're supposed to do. But then we're also supposed to move beyond just encouragement. That we are called to provide concrete steps that can be applied to lives. To actually help people to get the tools they need to live their lives more effectively. I mean, if you think back to my hiking experience, as those winds were blowing around, my life was in danger. Right? But as I said, my personal flavor of dysfunction is that whenever my mind starts telling me that this is too hard, you have to stop, my reaction is exactly the opposite. That I'm going to prove that I can do this. And I have a long list of stories to tell you that that was a bad idea. Right? So imagine if my partner, as my dysfunction is pushing me into danger, if my partner would have just said, hey man, don't give up. You can do this. He would have literally encouraged me right into a ravine. I needed more than encouragement that day, right? What I needed were things like this: tools and experience, right? Because he was traveling with me on this journey, in that moment, he'd earned the right to tell me something that was hard for me to hear. And I trusted that he had my best interest in mind when he said it. Because he could honestly say to me, I have walked this path before. And I know that everything in you is telling you have to keep pushing forward, that this is the only choice for you. But I'm telling you that that's not the way it has to be. That we can walk out of here together in a different way than we walked into here. And I think that as a church, we need to take that kind of practical approach to the way that we function and the way we operate. That we need to be willing to walk with people in their journey, whether they believe in Jesus or not. Right? You do not have to believe to belong. Right? We are here to serve the people where God has placed us. And we do that by walking with them in real life, wanting nothing from them, with no conditions. And in that, we can start to carry, or at least help carry, the weight of the load that so many people are carrying. So as we look to the year ahead, and as I kind of wanted to boil down in one statement what I think the year ahead is about for this church. It's about becoming a place that empowers people and shows people that you do not have to go alone. Because I believe that one of the biggest challenges in society as a whole today, Christian and non-Christian, is that people feel like they don't have support in life. They don't have adequate support. And too many people feel like they are all alone, and being all alone feels like the only choice. And that no one wants to help you without it costing you something. And I think people need an option that allows them to get help and support that doesn't have to cost them something. So as we look to the year ahead, what we would like to do, and you'll see it as we talk about the budget later today, is that we want to move into an environment of actively sharing life with people. And to do that, we're going to invest in creating environments that actually allow us and others to build authentic relationships, real relationships where you're really sharing life and you're really working together. And we want to be a place that provides real life support for real life issues. No magic, we'll pray for you, and then we forget about it. Or Jesus loves you, and we never talk to him again. We show up, we get in the mud, and we walk with them when it's hard. I believe that is what God has called us to do. Now, the thing is that as I describe that, you may go, well, that doesn't sound like church to me. Isn't church about learning and studying the Bible? Isn't that what this is all about? And yeah, that's part of it. But what it's really about is about applying what we learn. It's about looking at the life of Jesus and going, wow, I could do some of that too. And deciding to do that sort of thing. Because I believe that learning is important, but far more important than learning is application. Is actually doing the things that we've learned. Because there has been a challenge in the church going back to the very early days, going all the way back to the first century. That all the way back to the first century, there was this tendency to focus just on the learning side of church. And learning is important. But if we only focus on learning, we never get to the application. And if we look back to the first century church leader, a guy named James, James was seeing this happen less than 50 years after Jesus, probably more like 25, 30 years after Jesus. He was seeing this start to happen already. And James is a really important first century church leader because he had a very unique relationship to Jesus. He was his brother. But here's the thing, right, is that during most of Jesus' life, James didn't believe in him. James didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was. As near as we can tell, do you know what James thought about Jesus? It was crazy. He actually would try to pull him out of situations because you're embarrassing the family. But then something happened. Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection, and he pulled it off. And when his brother showed back up, James started to believe that Jesus is who he said he is. And in that, James then rose up to become a really significant leader in the first century church. And one of the things that I like about James is that James was a very direct speaker, sometimes painfully direct. But he wanted to boil these things down where don't get caught up in a bunch of concepts and a bunch of details. Here's what needs to happen. And that's what James would do. And so as James started to notice that the churches were focusing more on learning than application, he had this to say about it. He said, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. But don't just listen to God's word. You must also do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. So he starts out by saying that, to be clear, listening is important. We certainly should be listening more than we talk. It's important to our relationships. And when we come together on Sunday mornings to gather, it's important to listen so that we learn. But when it comes to church, don't just listen. When we listen with an explicit goal. We listen so that we can actually be equipped to go to work. That's the reason that we listen. We don't listen for knowledge's sake. We listen in order to do something. And then he carries on from there. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye, have a good day, stay warm, eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it's dead and it's useless. Now, as I said, James speaks really directly, and sometimes he speaks harshly. But I don't think that James is trying to be hurtful in that statement. I think he's just trying to make a point, and he wants to make a point in a way that people receive it. Because he understands this temptation to get focused on studying and learning. So focused that we lose sight of our responsibility to invest in others. We lose sight of the fact that we are called into action. Now, in this statement that James makes, he's using an example, right? An example that we are responsible to help people have enough food and to have effectively shelter. Now, he's using it as an example, but very often, because of the example he uses, these verses are normally applied only to the importance of meeting people's physical needs. In other words, they're applied primarily to the importance of charitable work. And of course, meeting people's physical needs, critically important. Charitable work, critically important. But these things also apply to more than that. They apply to meeting people's emotional needs, being willing to be in the emotional struggles with people. That we are called to use the gifts we have as believers to actually invest in the lives of people around us. And it's equally important whether they're physical needs or emotional needs. James is saying that we are called to invest in people's lives. And again, this phrase just sticks with me over and over this week. We are called to provide real life support for real life issues. So as we plan the year ahead, that's what we're going to do. That is going to be our focus going forward. We want to be willing to actually step fully into the struggles of the people in our community. But as I was thinking about that, my first thought is, man, there are so many different people with so many different struggles. How can we possibly ever do this in a meaningful way? And then I realized that although it can be tempting to try to solve every problem in front of us, if we do that, we're never going to succeed. We've got to narrow the problem space down into something that we can tackle. Again, the road is long. Over the next 10, 20 years, we can probably solve a lot more. But to get started, I think we need to narrow in on a few key things. So with that in mind, I think there are 3 key areas that we need to start putting our energy into this year. We'll start these things this year. It will take us years to do this. But I think there are 3 key areas that I believe God is leading us to step fully into. One is children, actually serving the needs of children. One is young adults. And one is parents. Now, as I list all that, you're probably thinking, I thought you said you're going to narrow this down. Because that seems like a huge set of problems. And for me, once you say children, I'm like, I don't know, Fortunately, my wife is much better at that than I am. But although these are distinct phases of life, there's some things about these phases of life that they have deeply in common. These are periods in a person's life where you're very often facing challenging decisions, and the choice you make has life-altering implications. Now, I'm not saying that never happens later in life. In my 50s, I got into ministry. That was a life-altering decision, right? But it wasn't a daily part of my life. But think back to when you were a kid. Think back when you were first starting your profession. All those sort of times. People as children, young adults, and parents, you're in these moments in your life where it just feels like you're making one hard decision after another. Or sometimes they're really challenging decisions that you don't realize are challenging decisions until you've made the wrong one and you see the way it plays out. So with that, I do think that is a very common aspect across these three phases of life. And I think what ends up happening is because there are so many challenges in those phases of life, you also have a high frequency of disappointments. Because things often don't go the way you'd like them to go. And if you start to feel stuck in one of these parts of your life, you can feel like you're stuck forever. And you start to get on that path where it feels like the only thing you can get is the same thing you've been getting. And as that starts to happen, you start wanting to escape from that feeling. You start wanting to try to find relief. And as we start to do that, we start to get into things that get us into trouble. And those could be some really dangerous gets sometimes, and we never get back out of. And I think that we as a church have to decide that we are not going to accept that those are the only options that people in our community have. That we have to decide that we want people to have more options, but that's going to take concrete action. Because what I want to do is I want this to be a church that gives people a bunch more gets, a whole bunch more gets than what I just said. I want this church to be a place where people can start to get together with others rather than feeling like they're always alone. And maybe people get a chance to know some new people and expand their circle of friends and their circle of influence and have a larger circle of influence. I want people to be able to, people to get access to the tools and information they need to live their lives more effectively. And I want this to be a place where people can get into a community that walks through life with you. Now, I firmly believe that this church is a community. But I think we need to kind of expand the ways we build community so people can have a longer runway to get connected with the Sunday community, if that's what they want to do. I think we have to look at what our responsibility is very differently than we have in the past, than I have in the past. I think that we are in a time of very unique challenges. And so, as we think about kind of serving these three phases of life, and think about the specific things we want to do for those three phases of life, there's also something kind of interesting, is that not only do each of those phases of life have common elements to them, but those three phases of life are also really interconnected. I mean, if we think about it, starting with children, right? If you start with children, over time, what happens? Children grow into young adults. And as you become a young adult, you get into more serious relationships. And as you get into more serious relationships, a lot of young adults become parents, right? And what do parents do? They raise and care for their children. So what it means then is that you've got these three interconnected pieces of life that face incredible challenges. And they each are tied up in a cycle. And it can either be a good cycle or a damaging cycle. And it has to do with the influences in your life to decide what kind of cycle that is. So I believe that if we're willing to do the work to invest in each of these phases of life, as we affect one life, that one life can be life-changing. But then think of the person who's in one phase of life that's been positively impacted as they move into the next phase of life. They take that with them. And think about a family where maybe both a parent and a child are having positive influences in their lives. Well, that starts to go from being just life-changing to family-changing. And if families start changing, that changes everything. that changes everything. People's lives start to get better, and people start to have more positive influences on each other. And community becomes central to who you are, and you recognize that you are not alone. Because, we make all of our best decisions all alone, late at night, after 10. Right? No, we do. Yeah, right. The reality is we do a lot better in community, right? Because so often, right, is that, I'll speak just for myself, that I can have things in my head that sound like really good ideas, and I start to explain what I'm thinking to somebody else. Sometimes it's the blank look on their face that tells me it's not a good idea. But very often it's the verbalization, right? Just saying what you're thinking forces you to face the realities of your thoughts. But you have to be in community in order to do that. So my friends, I believe that is what God is calling us to do, that is the world and the effort that we are stepping into. But it will only work if we are willing to decide we're willing to do the work. And so, big ideas are lots of fun, but we need concrete things that we're going to do. We've got to put stakes in the ground on things we're going to do. And so the goal is this year to get at least one stake in the ground on each of these three things. And our starting point is going to be kids ministry, what we used to call Sunday school. It's generally called Kidmin now. So kids ministry, if we look at what's effective in the time we live in, it's very different than what those of us who went to Sunday school will remember Sunday school being like. It's not really about memorizing Bible verses and that sort of thing. And I know we're going to go, oh, what do you mean, right? But the reality is that what we want to want to equip children for life with a relationship to God. And so we need to be creative in how we do these things. So as we approach KidMin, we're going to kind of use a combination of approaches. That we want to make sure it's something kids like and are having fun doing. Remember that for many of us, our parents gave us no choice but to go to Sunday school. We didn't have to like it, right? We were going anyway. But for many of these kids, their parents aren't here. The kid doesn't want to go. The kid's not going to go. Kids gotta want to go. So we're going to use a couple of approaches. We want to make sure it's fun. We live in a very high media time, with videos and so forth. So we will leverage media to make it fun, to get their attention, to draw them in, to comfort, to actually enjoy themselves. No ulterior motive. We want them to enjoy themselves so that they enjoy themselves. That's all we're looking for there. But we also want them to start to develop interpersonal skills, personal interactions. And so as our numbers allow, we'll actually have small groups for the kids so that they learn to communicate to one another. They learn to communicate in the group. They learn to know how to trust someone and know that there's someone maybe you can't trust, and learn those skills early as opposed to waiting till you get really messed up at adults messing with you, sort of thing. And our goal is going to be simple. Our goal is to get kids to learn three things. I want them to learn to love God. I want them to learn to love others. And this last one, this is the big one to me. Learn to love life. Because I didn't love life for most of it. I spent a lot of time trying to escape it. Because when life feels hard and hopeless, that's what we start to do. And we believe that if we can instill these values in kids with a relationship with God, the ability to relate to others, and actually wake up wanting to be alive today, and engage with life, and recognize it's not something you're trying to escape, that these kids will start to see things incredibly differently. And rather than trying to avoid life, we'll see the beauty of life. Now, of course, as I wax ecstatic over how cool I think our kids ministry is, there's a really obvious question. Who's going to go? Right? There's no kids here, right? There's no kids here, and I realize that. But I think that there is a simple reality. If you wait for them to come to build it, they ain't never going to come, right? If you're a young family looking for a church, you got one church that has a kids ministry and one that doesn't. Which one are you going to go to? Even if you might like the other one better. And also, and I truly believe this, that if we as a church say to a couple, hey, we love you guys, we're so glad you're here, this is awesome, but we'll deal with your kids when they get here, our words can say, I love you all day long. Our actions don't back it up. Right? So we need to be willing to say that we're going to do the work. We're going to put in the money. We're going to put in the time to build a kids ministry, and we're going to do the work to get kids to come check it out. Right? We're not trying to pressure anybody. There's no bait and switch here. We want to build a good program that people want to be at. And that's what we're really going to try to do. And so this is kind of our launching point. This is our first stake in the ground. That we're going to launch kids ministry April 24th. It's roughly 2 months from now. But it's the Sunday after Easter. All right, so Sunday after Easter, we will launch kids ministry. And I'm a huge believer that whenever you first start doing something, you need to narrow the parameters. If you try to go too wide, you just can't do it successfully. So we're targeting very specific grades, K through 5th. We think that's a really kind of a good sweet spot in there. I think it's something we believe we can do well. And we think it's a really solid range of attracting kids and families. So that's where we're going to be at. But now, one thing I'll say, though, is that this approach that we're talking about, using the multi-layered experiences of media, trying to move towards small groups for the kids, this is a personnel-intensive approach. I mean, to pull this off correctly, we need 2 people to show up as volunteers every week, at least 2. Right? So what that means is we need volunteers, man. And that's the thing that I want to kind of repeat over and over here, is that everything I say, I can be as excited as I want. If we don't show up, and I mean we don't show up, it ain't going to happen. Right? This is our time to pull together and say that we are going to serve. Right? And this church has a huge history of serving. It may look a little different than it did in the past, but it's the same thing you guys have done for decades. We're just impacting our current community a little bit differently. So if you like kids, this is a great opportunity. If you just want to make a difference in some kids' lives, this is a great opportunity. So actually, that's all I'm going to say about it. Next week, Bonnie will talk a little bit more about learning more about volunteering and that sort of thing. But the key thing I want you guys to take away from this is that this is where we're starting, and we're starting in less than 2 months. Right? So now, after kids ministry, we have young adults. We want to make opportunities available for young adults. And I think we should start with something really simple. Social gatherings. We simply want the ability for young adults to be able to get together, not have to go to a bar, not have to spend a ton of money. That's what we want to do. Create a social experience, box it in, we're not trying to be all things to all people. Don't have to do it, not every Friday night sort of thing, but regular events where there are social gatherings where something you can have a little bit of fun. You don't have to go to a bar, you don't have to spend a ton of money. Right? But as we build relationships with people and we start to understand more about people's interests, I would like to grow that into life skill resources. If you want to take classes about faith or learn more about faith, there's a path to do that without making the Sunday commitment sort of thing. But also practical things, financial skills. I know so many people who had so many challenges with finances because they never learned fundamental financial skills at a young age. Right? So again, it goes back to empowering people in a practical way. Because this is all about relationship building real relationships. Now, this one's still in a pretty early stage. If you want to kind of be part of our planning and stuff here, let me know. We'll start to pull together a team to kind of really start to hammer these things out a bit more. But that's the second thing I'd like to really be able to move into. Once we get the kids ministry going, move into young adults. And then finally, we want to be resourcing parents and families. A few months ago, I went around and talked to the school nurse, talked to the guidance counselor, talked to the principal, talked to some other folks. And the thing I heard over and over again is parents are struggling. that so many parents just feel like they're the only one in a given situation. And one of the most interesting things I heard someone say was that someone just came in and told me their situation, told me they feel like they're entirely alone, there's no one else going through what they're going through, and that was the 5th time this week I had that exact conversation. 5 families going through the exact same thing, just aren't connected to one another. Because when you're struggling, you just feel alone. That's kind of how it works. But if you can just be with other people who are going through the same thing, right? Even if they don't have any answers, at least you know you're not alone. But then you start to connect with more people and you find someone who's a little further in the parenting cycle than you are, and they go, yeah, I faced that too. I saw this thing work, I saw that thing not work. And now you're starting to build community. So as we resource parents and families, we want to start with trying to put together parenting groups. But now I think that, to me, this is the hardest one to pull off well, because we want to make sure we're doing a really exceptional job of this. So as a bit of a stretch goal, what we actually have in the budget is to hire a part-time family life person in the latter half of the year to actually bring someone in who really understands these issues, can really help us kind of know the way forward, to really know how to do this sort of thing well. Because we want to be sure that we're providing parents with the kind of support that they need in a healthy and meaningful way. Now again, this one's really in the early stages because this is kind of phase 3 for us. But again, if you have ideas, you want to be part of a team kind of trying to put this together, let me know and we'll start building a team to start working these things out. Now, as I describe all these things that we'd like to do, what that means is that we're going to start using our gathering space downstairs, our fellowship hall, a lot more than we do now. If we even get half successful, we're going to be using that space a lot more than we do now. So what we're going to be doing in the coming months is sprucing the place up. Right? Nothing big, but you notice the plaster's peeling in there. I know the paint on those walls is over 40 years old. Right? There's a date on there that's like 43, 44 years ago from when they put the stencils on. 1977, there you go. So that's 45 years, is that right? That's 45 years ago. I feel like every 45 years is okay to paint. I really do. So we'll patch up the plaster, put some paint on the walls, and replace the carpet. Right? And that's kind of all. We're not looking to spend a ton of money on this, but we want to spruce it up. We want to make it a little nicer. And since we're using these programs as a key way to connect to our community, for many people, their first introduction to our church is there, not up here. And so we want people to feel at home, and we want to make a really good first impression. Because the thing I want to really, really enforce here is that everything I've talked about here, there's no admission, right? There's no price of admission. This is for our community. So the goal is to reach as wide as we can to provide these services to people wanting nothing in return. This is not a transaction. But now as I say that, I do believe that there will be people, as they start to get closer to the things we're doing, who will want to move to the next level of faith. But that is not a condition of what we do. But I think if you look at the first century church, they cared for each other for real. And from that, they built relationships. And as we build relationships, people start to share. There's always this thing about the term we use as Christians, right, is discipleship. That we want to disciple other people. We want to be in discipleship with other people. We want to be a disciple. And basically that means we share our faith, right, is what we mean by that. And I've seen 1,000 classes on being a disciple and discipleship. I heard one guy put it so perfectly. He's like, people take all these classes. You know what discipleship is? It's a remedial class in being a friend. That's discipleship. Real life with real people in a real way. Over time, you share stories with one another. And in that, that's how people find a relationship with God. Like, we don't sell it, right? We just share through life. And so, anyway, that's me kind of going on about what I think is important. But the reason I go into this is that I have spent a lot of time on this. And for the since almost the day I started here, I threw a post-it on my computer monitor, which says, why does the United Church of Warner exist? And I meditate on that question pretty much every day. And this is where I've landed. I believe, man, I think this church is uniquely positioned and qualified to make an incredible difference in this community. And I truly believe that it is what God is calling us to do. That I do not believe that we are accidentally in this location in this exact time. You know, I am just so grateful to be here, to see what people are doing for one another here. And so many of us are actually already connected in the community. All we're trying to do is bring an organized structure around that. And I truly believe that we can be successful as long as we're willing to do what it takes to be successful. Because I know these are huge goals. These are huge goals. And doing this well is going to take years. Just so you guys know, I never plan to have another job besides this one, right? This is it for me. This is it, I'm planning for like 20 years with you guys. This has to work, right? So we want to make this successful. And I think we can do that if we're willing to work hard and be patient. I believe that this will come together, but I think we do need to start now, which is why we're starting now, starting this year. So what I would ask is that we be willing to follow James's lead. James explains that we are called to put our faith into action. And I think that for us to do that, we need to do something so big that it scares us. Because I don't know how we're going to do all this, but I believe we will if we try. Because there's an old saying that if your dreams don't scare you, then they're not big enough. And I truly believe that as we step into this, if we truly bring our best to try to achieve these things, that anything we lack along the way, God will provide, and it will come together. But we got to be all in first. So I'm going to ask that we be all in. So as a church, we need to be all in with our budget. Not that we have to spend all our budget. I mean, we're serious about how we use our budget when I say that. We need to be all in our building. This building, to me, this building has one purpose, and that is serving our community. If we need storage, we need other uses, we have another building over there we can use that for. This building is about serving our community. And we need to be all in our time. We need to be willing to, and I'm not asking anyone to exhaust themselves. I'm simply saying that we need to invest our time meaningfully as we do these things. Because the only way the things I am describing can be successful is with volunteers. We have to come around one another. We have to step into this. But I truly believe that we can change our little slice of the world. That we can start to relieve a lot of the pain that people are suffering. We can start to relieve a lot of the difficulties that we run into later in life because we didn't get support earlier in life. And I truly believe that. Things can be incredibly different because you are here. And we can do that.